What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of What If You Could. And today I have a gentleman who I met, immediately connected with this young man, picked up both of his books. We've ravished them, myself and my wife. I don't know if could you ravish a book, Doc?
Yeah, you can ravish a book just like you can ravish a peach.
Well, according to John Travolta, I can eat a peach for hours, but I'm not going there. Um, so we loved the book. So I groveled and got the doctor on the podcast. So welcome, Dr. Mark McDonald.
Thanks for having me on, Gary. Looking forward to it.
I love this. So I'm going to go ahead and fire off the doctor's bio real quick, and then we'll jump in. So, born and raised in Los Angeles, Dr. Mark McDonald graduated from UC Berkeley before attending medical school at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Trained in both adult and child and adolescent psychiatry at UCLA, he now works primarily with children in private practice in West Los Angeles. Dr. McDonald has lived and worked in Europe, Asia, and Central America. He was the first to diagnose and popularize the phenomenon of mass delusional psychosis, and his opinions on topics such as the pandemic of fear and the recent attacks on children and parental rights have been widely publicized in local and national news, including the Wall Street Journal and the Federalist. He has been interviewed on platforms ranging from radio shows, Dennis Prager's Ultimate Issues Hour, and mainstream news outlets like the Tucker Carlson Tonight Show. He is co-host of the podcast Informed Dissent and author of United States of Fear and Freedom from Fear. His weekly publications, as well as links to social media and his books, can be found at his website, www.dissidentmd.com, and we will be sure to post that and your other info on the podcast. So again, welcome, Dr. McDonald.
One minor correction, Gary, the podcast that I co-host with Dr. Jeff Barkey is called Informed Dissent, Dissent, not Informed Dissident.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll make sure when we post that we get that correct on the podcast. Is that good?
Good.
Cool biz. Okay. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of questions, but I just, from having, read both books, having chatted with you a little bit, I would imagine that maybe some people come off and say, well, he's a little bit mean or not empathetic, or he's got this tough love and
misogynist, patriarch, white ring supremacist, Trump supporting Hitlerite, those sorts of things.
So there's a plethora. There's a plethora that I.
Oh, there's a cornucopia.
Yeah, a cornucopia. Well, it is almost Thanksgiving, so that would be appropriate. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, I found that what you talked about and you mentioned in your book is it's honesty, truth, and reality, and I think we've lost that. And the truth of the matter is, when you're too nice to people and you kiss their ass and you baby them, you actually hurt them more than help them.
I think you just made an excellent point, which I think goes to the larger issue of the failings of our culture today, which is on a really fundamental level, a disconnection from reality. And as a psychiatrist, I have the credentials to diagnose this because that's what I do for a living with patients in my office every day. The United States was always about confronting reality. We're a frontier country. We're a bit violent compared to other nations. We get into it, we fight, we die, we explore, we sow, we reap, we harvest, we engage in conflicts. So we do have a dark side or a shadow side to our pursuit for truth and freedom, but that's true for everything. And we've never been shy to acknowledge that as a nation. What we've done in the last generation, and I'd say increasingly in the last 10 years and in the last 4 or 5 since 2020 on steroids, is completely abdicate all sense of respect for or even acknowledgement for reality. We're living essentially in a fractured world right now where about half the country lives in reality and the other half doesn't. I would even say it's like a giant insane asylum where half of the people are staff and half are patients. It's hard to exaggerate this. It is so bad today. It is so bad. And one could blame a lot of specific sources, schools, media, corrupt politicians, corporations, and absolutely they're accountable. Anthony Fauci is certainly accountable for what he did during the pandemic, during the lockdowns. However, I think we also have to look in the mirror and hold ourselves accountable because none of this could have happened. You know, the media, the corporations, the politicians, the educational systems, none of this could have happened without our consent. We have consented to it, either affirmatively or tacitly. When you go out on the street and you talk to people and you ask basic questions like, hey, do you think there are two sexes, male and female? And you get a kind of tentative, pussyfooting, dancing around the issue kind of an answer. Well, you know, it kind of depends. I mean, people can identify blah, 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 blah. That's not a informed dissent conversation. That is basically a chat with a lunatic. And if these are the way that this is the way that Americans are thinking about basic reality, how on earth are they going to be able to debate tax policy or what is correctly put into a curriculum for a 10th grade student? This is impossible. This is like trying to discuss calculus with someone who doesn't know how to add. That's where we are today. So I've been adamant in the way that I speak to people that, as Ben Shapiro has fondly said for years, facts don't care about your feelings. I really don't care about your feelings. Now, I do if you're a patient of mine, obviously, but if you're out in the public and I'm speaking to you, I don't care honestly about how you feel because how you feel is largely what got us into this mess in the first place because you're so narcissistically preoccupied with your feelings rather than with truth and reality. So what I care about is truth. What I care about is what's real. I love it when people disagree with me. That's absolutely critical for us to reach good decisions, sharpening the edge of the knife, so to speak. But what I won't countenance, what I won't tolerate is people that are, you know, as they were fond of saying years ago, pissing on my shoe and telling me it's raining. I don't put up with that. And if that hurts your feelings, if that makes you feel triggered, if that makes you feel that you're being abused and suffering from the misogynistic rants of a tyrant, well, tough shit. I'm so out of patience for people that refuse to acknowledge what is directly in front of them. And I think that really needs to be pushed onto people as much as possible because that's really the starting point of our conversation. Every conversation has to start from a place of truth and reality. And then from there, we can argue. But if you're going to tell me that there are 75 different genders and then try to discuss with me a compromise solution on how to implement that in the school system, I'm not even going to engage in that conversation. I'm going to go tell you to take a walk because you're crazy. End of conversation. That's my position today.
Dude, I think from your books and from talking to you in person and now, I think one of your biggest challenges is you don't have the ability to express yourself. You're not firm on a point. But w when we look at some of these things and you know, social media, I mean, you could probably spend 10 days on that. But I mean, what's the difference between what's happening as far as a fear and a phobia? I mean, is it gotten to the point where people are they're even beyond fear anymore?
I think it started in 2020 and 2021 as a weaponized takeover of our country, the weapon being, and the fuel, I would say, being fear. Because when people are scared, they're not able to make rational decisions. So they look towards a strongman. They look towards a so-called leader, somebody that will guarantee their security, always at a price, of course, because security always comes with a price. You know, you don't want your sandwich shop firebombed by the mafia. You pay them a fee, right? That's how it works. And then you get security. You don't get firebombed. So that's kind of what we were put into in 2020 by a mafia. And I think over time, that fear coalesced into an addiction or an obsession or a chronic state, similar to the way that when people first get a cigarette, the first the first experience gives them a high. It makes them feel energetic, powerful, happy, perhaps. But then after the 50th cigarette, the 100th cigarette, the cigarette that they're taking, maybe the 10 that they need then every single hour, only gets them back to their baseline of normal functioning. It doesn't give them the high anymore. And I think Americans became addicted to fear as a way for them to just reach a baseline state of what they considered to be normal. Because without the fear, they would just spin out of control. Without putting a mask on, driving alone in their car, they wouldn't be able to concentrate on the road because it's just too dangerous. Without wearing the mask on their scooter, driving home drunk at 2 a.m. from the bar after 4th of July when everything closed without a helmet or a headlight, they felt absolutely secure and safe, knowing that they weren't going to catch a virus that would probably give them a mild cold. But you see where this goes, you know, now people aren't following basic safety precautions like not carrying their girlfriend at night on a helmetless, nightless, lightless scooter at 2 in the morning, driving and weaving around in traffic while drunk. That's completely fine. But the mask, of course, that's absolutely critical. So they get hyper focused on their fear over something that's innocuous, and then they actually forget how to live. And that's where we, I think, have come to, because many Americans today have become so addicted to their fear that without it, if they were to give up their fear and actually stop worshiping on the altar of safety and actually start taking risks again, which is how America was founded, by risk taking, if they were to do that, they would just stop functioning. They wouldn't. I would even go so far as to say that without fear, many Americans today would not even have a sense of their own identity. They would feel like empty shells. They identify with fear. And if you take that fear away, if you tell them, if you confront them and say, take that mask off, they feel that you are ripping their drug from their cold, dead fingers. That is how sick this fear pathology has become, this fear addiction today in the United States.
And I think that's why I love that you have wrapped this in addiction, and how you've based this book, like you mentioned, on the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was Jason Peters,
Jordan Peterson's
Jordan
12 Rules for Life.
12 Rules for Life, because it is an addiction, and you can see it. I mean, you can see when you're interacting, it's like, don't take away my meth pipe, because I need that to get through the day. And don't take away my fear. Don't take away my ability to be fearful. Or I won't be able to function whatsoever, because that's the only thing I'm able to hold on to, right? I mean, you're seeing it.
You're seeing it in bizarre locations today that you would think would have overcome this. I signed up as a member for a group called Group Muse, which is a
What was it called?
national Group Muse, GROUPMUSE,
Mhm.
it's been around for years, apparently. It started in New York, it spread to the West Coast. It's an online membership. It's like $9 a month. It's not a lot of money, that allows you to reserve spaces in your local town, city, wherever you live, largely at people's homes who host music events, little concerts. It can be world music, it can be jazz, it can be classical, it can be a singer, a vocalist, a keyboard performer. And these are top flight musicians. These are people who are flying into LA to play at Disney Concert Hall, Hollywood Bowl, the LA Phil, and they've got a night off. And they just want to go play for a crowd of 20, 30, 40, 50 people in someone's backyard here in LA, where it's, pretty warm most of the year, and take donations because they just really like connecting with people, and not in this giant hall that's really formal wearing their tux. They show up in their jeans and a t-shirt, and they play Stravinsky on their violin. So I
That's
thought, this
awesome.
sounds really cool. I love classical music. I played for 20 years. I know jazz music very well. And I don't want to go and drive to downtown LA, spend $100 on a ticket, $40 on parking, and then be harassed by masked police walking into the pavilion and show your documents, Jew. Where's your Star of David? So I signed up for it and I went to a couple and they were really great. I dropped $20 in the hat at the end to say thank you to the musician, and I saved 100 on all the other fees. It's a small amount of money for me to support local, well, national music, but at a local level. And then I found one that I really wanted to go to last week. I was really excited. It was a jazz quartet, like 2 miles from my house, really close by, outdoors, in a yard, photographs of the benches and the chairs that they're going to set up, a little stage. I thought, this is amazing. These are really top level singers. I want to go to this. So I'm about to click reserve. And then I look more closely at the description. I think something's a little off here. And I see all these little emblems, like little symbols and signs at the top of the page with little lines. And what is this? What's going on? And then I see all these little syringes and masks and red circles and lines. And I read it carefully. And it has like 4 or 5 paragraphs describing that every person that goes in has to follow a requirement to get tested. Remember that term, to be tested, that came out in 2021, to be tested within 24 hours prior to the event. And if not, to wear a mask. And you must have vaccination proof, but it's on the honor system. You just have to say and then sign an attestation. And then there's a woman who is assigned, not the host, but a woman assigned at the door called the ambassador of health. And so she's going to sit at a table and she's going to monitor people walking in and check that they followed all these precautions. And if they didn't, she's going to boot them out. And I'm thinking, what the? This is 2024, an outdoor concert in Los Angeles. And they're acting like we're on a kind of, second day of 28 days later, the plague, right before the purge starts. I circled all of this bullshit in red and I sent it to the corporate headquarters. And I said, what the hell are you guys thinking? And I wrote, if you want to foster community, which is the manifesto mission statement of Group Muse, if you want to foster community, why the hell are you fostering phobias? Why are you allowing people? It was all done by the host, by the way, not by the company. Why are you allowing the host to put out this missive of fear and then order people to succumb to it in exchange for listening to music? This is happening right now. This is formal practice by local residents of LA, supported, not pushed, but supported and endorsed by a national outdoor community music fostering organization. So we have really lost our way, and we are not back. As Joe Rogan said maybe a couple months ago, he said, listeners, we lost a lot of Americans during the lockdowns, and many of them are still with us.
Nailed it. It's so true. They are still locked down. Even if they kind of function or go to work or maybe leave the house for a second, they're still locked down in their cabeza. And I love the name, the Ambassador of Health. Was she from the Bureau of Health too? Did the comrades create the Bureau
I
of
think she graduated from the ambassador program under LA Mayor at the time, Eric Garcetti, which we called the snitch program, where you could go and look through the windows of stores that were supposed to be closed and see if the lights were on. And then you could call a special number, and leave a voicemail and say, the bread shop down the street, they're baking bread and they're supposed to be closed. Shut them down. And you were designated as a literal ambassador. That's what they called it, the ambassador program. And you got paid. And he advertised this on TV in 2020 as the Snitches Get Riches program. LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, otherwise known as the Ambassador program. He thought that was great. He thought, this is really great. This is really funny. And I thought, that is sinister. That is sick.
the snitches get riches? You turn in, hey man, what's so bizarre is I see people on one side that are saying, boy, I know who would turn in Anne Frank, but the side that's saying it are the people that would turn in Anne
Isn't that the
Frank. I'm
irony?
like, wait a minute, you can't say that. You are the people who would turn in.
The term projection has been overused, just like the term narcissist, and a lot of people don't know what it means. But what you just noted is an example of projection. And the projection comes almost exclusively from one side of the body politic. It comes from those who want to control us.
Yep.
And that's the top and also the bottom. It comes from the Department of Justice, and it comes from the Karen down at Sprouts in the bakery section, and
Department
everyone
of
in between.
Justice. You have to use parentheses when you say Department of Justice. Yeah, you can't just say the Department of Justice. But the challenge is, and I know that it's kind of what you're specializing in now, but I think we could both agree that one generation may be completely lost, but the generation below them, the younger kids, I mean, this is affecting the kids so hard. I mean, I know in your work, you're working with a lot of children. How are these kids able to get out of this when their parents are both whack? I mean, how do we help these kids?
Well, I wrote the book in part for that reason. It obviously is not age specific. You have to be able to read. Although actually, your mother could read it to you like a nighttime, fairy tale, and you
Yep.
probably understand it. It's not written at a college level academic discourse.
I
Um,
was I was able to read it, and when we very first met, you used a word, and I said, "Doc, I'm sorry, I'm not that bright. What the hell did that mean?" And you go, "Argumentative. What was it?
Polemic.
Yes, that's what you said. You said the books are about that, and I go, "What the hell does that mean?" But no, your books are written very well. I love how the chapters play on each other, kind of like AA. But I also like that the chapters are. If you go into this book and maybe you have thoughts about you or you've heard some things about Dr. McDonald, you might have a perception going into this book, but the book is actually very caring because you're saying, listen, guys, if you don't start facing the reality for you and your children, right, you're never coming out of this. It's not that I hate you, it's just I have to smack you in the head with a reality baseball bat because you just won't see. Like it's like you start out with, look in the mirror, man. There's some shit you got to get this through. So back to the kids though. How are you able to help the kids if the parents just are on cuckoo?
Well, the first step in my book, which, as you, I think, correctly noted, is written from a tone of kindness rather than a tone of caustic attack, which is how I wrote the first book, because we needed that. We needed to shake things up. Now we need to find a path forward, a repair, self-accountability first, because I don't believe that simply holding the top level accountable is going to solve the problem, because we fostered that, we grew them, we planted them, we nurtured them. We need to start with ourselves. We need to look in the mirror. We need to look to our right and left and look at the people in our families, our friends, our community circles, and give them this book if they are still clinging with dear life to their fear obsession, and give people an out, give people an option to let go of their fear so that they can start confronting true evil, because you can't confront evil if you're afraid. It's just not possible. Certainly not if the fear controls you. So the first step of the book is to acknowledge, as you do in AA, and as Jordan Peterson says frequently in his all of his writings, acknowledge that you have a problem. Acknowledge that you have an addiction. Even if your parents are great, if you are a youngster, a child, and you deny that, for example, you are completely obsessed by the number of likes that you get on your Instagram profile every day, if you can't acknowledge that that's what drives your mood throughout the day, well, we're not going to be able to talk about alternatives to growing your sense of identity outside of a cell phone. And a lot of kids are not willing to admit that. They're lying to themselves about the toxic influence of cell phones, which is an addiction. It's designed to be that way. And their fear, which is linked to that, of nobody liking them. That's their greatest fear. That they're going to wake up in the morning and they're going to see their profile has no activity. That is their greatest fear today. Where have we come? So I think one of the most important points in general for people that are unwell emotionally, particularly through this addiction process, and it can be addiction to any kind of fear. I talked about mass earlier and contamination, but that's not the only problem that we have. We have fear of rejection through a cell phone, which is a huge problem for young people. There's a lot of other fears as well. There's fear that the right wing is going to take over America, which is completely unjustified. And so they're addicted to granting power to the left, who's going to preserve their safety. That's another addiction for a lot of smart people. So this can occur at different levels and at all ages. The first thing to do, though, which I think has been very well received throughout the United States and perhaps the world through AA, and I certainly, grew up with this in Los Angeles because we're in the recovery community here in LA. Everybody's in recovery, right? In the entertainment industry. I thought it would resonate well with people here in Los Angeles, especially, is to say, I have an issue, I have a problem. I'm not doing well because my phobia and my addiction to fear, to phobias, is constraining me and is causing me to harm myself and other people. I think that's the very, very first step that has to be dealt with before you actually set up a plan. You have to hold yourself accountable. So I think self-accountability for children and for adults, and if it's not coming from the child, then facilitated by the parents, is absolutely essential. And if you don't have a good parent and you have a bad kid, there really isn't anything that can be done short of handing your child over to the government, which is really, I think, the goal of our government right now, is to wreck the younger generation.
Yes.
And then to say, look, parents screwed up. They don't have the ability to handle this anymore. We need to take over, send them to the internment camp, which is the school system. And we'll take them in, we'll feed them, we'll clothe them, we'll even cut their tits off and inject them with hormones to turn them into good little trans people. And if you, mom and dad, wish to fight back and challenge that, we'll call social services and we'll legally separate you from your children and you will never see them again.
Yeah. And the Department of Justice is right behind that. They're all for that. And the thing is, let's keep extending the hours. Let's make preschool. Let's get the kids at 4 in the morning and keep them until 9 o'clock at night. Let's keep extending the hours that we're keeping the kids here instead of limiting the hours that we're keeping the kids there. I mean, and this whole thing about kids and fear, I've had fear of public speaking. I've had fear of all sorts of shit, fear of success, fear of failure, and fear goes back forever. But now it's almost like a badge of honor. It's almost you're proud to tell everyone how afraid you are and how scared you are and how worried you are, right? It's almost like this cult figure of fear besides the addiction of it.
We've switched out our God that we worship and replaced it with an altar of fear. And that's what we worship today. The more afraid you are, the better a citizen you are. That started really in overdrive in 2020. Your expression of fear on your face with a mask, with a bunch of stickers. Like I have an I voted sticker on my shirt right now. Well, there was a I got the shot sticker. Remember that one?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then
And
putting
the
it
and
on
the
your,
ban the banner around your social media.
that's what I was just about to
Yeah,
say.
I got the number
Hmm.
17
I
plus
got boosted number
plus the other one.
17.
Yeah, I'm yeah, I
Hmm.
can't get over this cough and this chest cold, but I'm fully protected.
And that shows that you are a virtuous person, that you are willing to comply with government, and that you're willing to circumscribe your own rights on behalf of the health and well-being and safety of other people. That was a very powerful psychological flip that we underwent in 2020. And it's been happening for a long time in other ways, different movements. For example, the gay movement, the feminist movement, the eco movement, all of these sound great on the surface. And then you look underneath to what they produce, and they produce a lot of intimidation and compliance and ultimately destruction because of where they go. But if you're not on board with it, if you don't subscribe to it, you become the bad guy. So I think Americans today, starting with adults, and then obviously it's moving down into children, have really lost their will to stand up, to show courage. And this is another part of my book, another chapter later on in Freedom from Fear, was the necessity to act courageously. If we don't act courageously, we'll all lose. This idea that we're just going to keep feeding the crocodile, tips of our fingers until it goes away is not going to be successful.
Yeah.
We're going to wind up as a Stephen King short story that I read years ago about a surgeon who crashed his Cessna on an island and couldn't find any food. And so he decided to just start amputating parts of his body to feed himself. And he wound up with, no legs and one arm. This is a real short story. I read it when I was in high school. On one level, it's horrific, but on another, it's kind of a metaphor, really,
Yeah.
for what Americans are willing to do. How much amputation of your body freedom are you willing to give up in order to keep yourself from this boogeyman in the environment that's going to come out and get you?
You throughout the book have, certain themes about courage, standing up, facing yourself, facing other people, but you also do a lot about caring for people, like encourage people, teach people, reach out to people, like AA, be a sponsor, things like that. So there's a lot to that because if you're fearful, like a lot of people that you talked about, but in your soul, in your gut, you don't want to be, or you don't understand why you are so fearful. So instead of getting with the people that are shooting up heroin in the abandoned building, you go over to people who aren't wearing a mask or aren't fearful or whatever. And that encouragement helps you grow out of this, right? I mean, I hate this term, but I'm going to use it anyways. It does take a village. Don't go to the crackhead shoot up village. Go to the other
It takes
village.
a village, but not a village of idiots.
Right.
The title of that chapter is Drop the Dealer. You have a fear
Yep.
dealer basically who's dealing you the drug of fear. And
Yeah.
that could be your family, it could be the local shop owner that's got, BLM stickers all over the front. And every time you go in, looks at your white face and you grovel and say, "No, but I really have a lot of black friends." You've got to get away from these people. They're sick. You've got to surround yourself with people that, even if maybe you don't agree with a lot of their positions, they give you encouragement to be courageous. And that idea of good mental health is necessitated, is founded upon finding and building and maintaining a community of people that share fundamental values like courage, like truth, like honor, honesty. That's something that you can't ignore. You cannot be courageous in a vacuum. It's impossible. And even if you could, it would be very mentally draining and you wouldn't wind up better for it. So you need to find community. And as you're doing that, you have to simultaneously avoid going past that dealer every day and getting another hit on the fear bong. If you're an alcoholic and you have to walk home from work every day, why are you walking past the bar? Why would you do that? Why don't you walk past the juice shop and go in and talk to people who are drinking and eating healthy food and feeling great? And then seeing if you can get meal tips from them and then join them for lunch. Why are you going past the bar and hanging out with the old crowd and saying, "I'm just going to order a seltzer." And then, 17 drinks in, you're two sheets to the wind and you're lying flat on your face and in the drunk tank. This is very obvious and basic, and people in recovery would just nod their head and say, "Well, of course, so we learned that right away. That's why I got my sponsor." But it works the same way with fear. I think people surround themselves often with other people that echo their fears, their addiction, and then they make it that much harder to get out of it. So drop those people, cut them out of your life, start focusing on building a community of people who are fearless. That will inspire you to be fearless and courageous.
Yeah.
And stop living psychologically in a toxic environment. You can't win this battle if you don't clean up your your backyard, so to speak. You've got to do that. That's a very, very important process. And I say that to parents as well when they say, "Well, what am I going to do with poor little Johnny? I can't take away his cell phone. All of his friends have cell phones." I said, "Why don't you homeschool little Johnny and then connect him up with other homeschoolers who don't use devices and go out to museum trips and play baseball and get their hands dirty in the yard, practicing gardening and growing plants and sprouting things." He would have so much more pleasure looking at plants growing and tending to them and then eating them as a prize for his work than playing Candy Crush on his phone and growing eggplants on his little, gardening app, which is what they're all doing now. This is not intellectually that complicated, but it requires some balls on the part of the parents and maybe some sacrifice. Maybe the wife has to quit her job. Maybe you need to downsize your house, only drive one car. Maybe you need to move to a different community where you're paying less rent in order to economize so that your children can go to a homeschooled program. These are some of the basic decisions that parents have to make. And I've said for 4 years now to parents in audiences when they say, how do I do this? How do I do that? But we have this, but we have that, this issue, this problem, this financial constraint. I say, what is your primary goal as a parent? What is your obligation? And sometimes they just stare at me blankly, and I fill it in for them, and I say, it's to raise a healthy and good child into adulthood. And if you haven't succeeded at that, then you are a failure as a parent. Prima facie, you're a failure. You must set that as your goal, as your priority. Nothing else matters if you failed at that. And a lot of people don't want to hear that because it forces them to confront the reality that their mission may be in conflict with what they're actually investing in today, which is building up their bank account, getting up their friend circle on their phone, taking expensive vacations, making their life comfortable. The life of a parent should not be comfortable. If it is, you're probably doing something wrong.
Well, I know I've raised two sons and my current wife has two daughters. And remember, I mean, for us, for me and my first wife, I mean, we sacrificed for the kids. You know, we wouldn't go out. It's like, no, we want to stay home with the kids. We have family night. We ate dinner at the table every night, regardless. Heaven forbid there would be no phones at the dinner table. You know, even back then they were early. But the thing was, you know, your goal, like you said, I want to make sure my kids have a good childhood. I want to raise them right. I want them to grow up, and I'm going to be the parent, right? Nowadays, it's like, I just want to make sure my child is my friend. You know, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want to burden them with life's worries. It's just such bullshit. It's like, look, like one of your chapters, you talk about fear, right? Face the fear. But kids have to face the fear too, right? I mean, you can't keep sheltering kids from the world because otherwise they grow up like they are now.
Well, there's a high school in New York that announced about 5 days before the election that if students felt emotionally overwhelmed, that they could take the day off from school. This is a private school in New York City or north, outside of the city. And it costs $64,000 a year to send your kid there. It's K through 12. And this was what the head of school announced. And many of the parents echoed the sentiments of this head of school saying, I think this is the best thing to do. We need to keep our children safe. That
Safe
was
from what? Safe from what?
safe from
I know I get
discomfort
what they're
in
saying.
reality. That's
Right.
that's that's
Yes.
what they want to be safe from. Basically,
Yes.
we want them to be inured to life. They want their kids to be like Bubble Boy. And they assume that their children have no immune system. And yeah, if you put your child in a bubble from birth till age 10, he will have no immune system. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's not complicated.
Well, like you said, when you get kids, I mean, we raise the kids on a little ranch, and its statistics are like 1,000% correct on this. If you raise the kids in the dirt, playing in the mud, getting dirty, falling down, getting a scrape, they will be healthier kids. You keep them locked in the house, you keep them sterilized, you keep them, those kids are going to have asthma, they're going to have diabetes, they're going to have all these problems growing up, breathing problems, you know, because you've babied them to the point of sterilizing a child, and then you expose them to the world because they have to eventually leave, even though kids don't. And that's when we start seeing all these sicknesses coming in.
I
Forget about the 50 immunizations or 80 immunizations they've had, but just not getting them in the dirt, not getting them out in the real world, you know?
Well, I think that the immune system metaphor is a great one because people understand on a basic level how the immune system works, that you stress it in order to strengthen it. And people who have gone to the gym and who hasn't gone to the gym understand that you stress your musculature in order to strengthen it. You stress your bones in order to strengthen them. Old people that don't walk, that just sit all the time, they wind up with fractures because walking is what puts weight bearing experience for your bones on the bones, and that makes them strong, that keeps them strong. And that's the same thing for psychological strength. You can't get away from stress. And by stress, I don't mean intentionally making yourself anxious. I mean stress in the sense of challenge, conflict, confrontation, difference, disagreement. That's what I mean by stress, like stressing the system, like a stress test. You can't get away from that psychologically and expect somebody to come out with an emotionally resilient self. And even worse, to actually have a strong core identity. We have a lot of young people today who don't have a strong sense of identity, none whatsoever. And because of that, they're latching on to false identities, like the transgender movement. That's a great example of that. And when adults don't order their children to face reality, but pacify them and placate them and feed that fantasy that is not in accordance with reality, that's based upon some unmet emotional need, like I don't feel great in my body because my breasts are small at age 14, says the girl. And then the parents say, well, the reason for that is that you actually are a boy and you should just cut them off. If that's what we're going to do in order to make the little girl with the small breasts feel comfortable about her body, we've really lost our way. We need to tell that little girl, well, for one thing, you haven't fully developed yet, so give yourself some time, be patient. For another, say, you know what? People have breasts of all different sizes. And when you get older, you're going to find that some men really like large breasts and some men like little breasts. And it's not a problem. And then let that girl, let her sit with that for a while and let her come to the conclusion on her own that, you know what? There's a lot of different shapes and sizes of bodies, and I can actually come to really like mine, even though it might not look like the images I see on online porn. And that's one little step that you can lead that child down towards a sense of confidence and embracing of her actual real identity as a budding adult woman. But if you just bow right down to the transgender movement and say, well, your conflicts about your body just mean that you're a boy. Now you've just destroyed any potential psychological resiliency she'll ever have, and she's probably going to be wrecked for life.
And it kind of comes down to where we opened up with this. It's like, you know, thinking that you're being nice or being kind or we don't want to be harsh to our daughter or God forbid tell them the truth, right? You're actually hurting these kids. You're not doing them any favors. And I know you've been doing this a long time. This definitely started before 2020. It exploded after 2020, but I mean, you go back and you see the participation trophies and you see that, oh, Johnny, don't get mad at Johnny if he doesn't do well. He just struggles and shit like this. I mean, I don't know. Like, I talked to my brother about this. My brother and I we had the stupidest, shittiest upbringing, like most people, right? And we were both over the top, what I consider good dads. Very involved, tough love. We have good kids, right? And I think we went overboard. It was like we had such a shitty, neglected childhood that we're going to try our best to do better. But now I think because we've babied so many, a lot of us had baby and, like you said, bubble wrap these kids, we've kind of gone too far the other way.
Well, the generation that are now kind of in the retirement age, they made the mistake of trying to give their children what they didn't have growing up, rather than giving them what they did have, which was a sense of accountability, resiliency, work ethic, delayed gratification, sustenance on minimal supplies and money. These are amazing strengths that one has by living in adversity. To teach your child how to survive, much less thrive in adversity, that's one of the greatest gifts you can give a youngster. That instills a sense of power, confidence, uh, resilience, the ability to stand up to evil and to fight, to sacrifice. These are unbelievable gifts. And we passed that over completely. For a whole generation of kids, we gave them safety. We gave them self-esteem. We gave them the guarantee that no matter what they did and to what degree they failed, they would still be winners. This is this is not only being too nice, it's actually death by misplaced compassion. It's not compassion,
That's an
actually.
epic sentence, by the way. I hope you put it in one of your books if it's not already in it.
Sounds like the
Death,
title of my next book.
it should death by overboard compassion. Is that what it was? I should have wrote that
Misplaced
down.
compassion.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
Misplaced compassion.
Great line.
I had an analyst supervisor years ago when I was in a psychoanalytic training program who's now deceased, named Albert Mason. He was British and he was in his 70s when he first started teaching here in LA anyway, and always wore he was impeccably dressed, always wore a three-piece suit uh, until his last week of life, and had a great sense of humor. Very funny guy, very relaxed, and always had these really great snippets of wisdom that he would come out with at the least opportune moments. And someone asked him once about the compassion issue. Well, how can we help our patients uh, if we're being so compassionate all the time that we can't be tough with them? How do we do that? And he said, well, whenever you talk with your patient, you need to always balance compassion with truth. Because if you only give them compassion, you will be lying to them.
Wow.
And if you only give them truth, it will come across as mean and insensitive. So you have to give them truth, but it has to be laced with compassion. You have to tell them the truth, but with some aspect of kindness so that they can take the truth and they can swallow it. And don't move too extreme on one side or the other, or you won't be therapeutic. If your goal is therapy,
Mhm. Mhm.
your goal may always be therapy if you're not a therapist. If you're a political activist, it's not therapy, right? So this doesn't apply. But if you're trying to be therapeutic, then you need to find a balance. And I would say that this is true with parents. Parents also need to be truthful, but they have to imbue their truth with compassion. So your little boy climbs on the roof and says he's going to, fly because he's Batman. You can't say, "Oh, absolutely. I totally feel
I
your
support you,
identification.
Jimmy.
I support you in all your endeavors. You can never fail. Everything you do is lovely." And then he jumps off the roof to his death, right? But if you yell at him and say, "You stupid idiot. You're 8 years old. You don't know what the hell you're doing, you moron." All of which is true. He's 8 years old, he's an idiot, and he's a moron. Most children are. That's not going to be effective.
No.
So you have to say something like, well, actually, Johnny, hate to tell you this, but you're not Batman and you do not have the power of flight. But if you come down here, we're gonna find something that we can play that will allow you to pretend that you can fly while you're maybe running around the lawn so that if you fall, you're not going to get seriously hurt. Something like that. And he's like, oh, damn it. I thought I could fly off the roof. Well, maybe I can fly in the yard. Yeah, maybe. Okay, let's try that out. And
Yeah.
then so you don't crush his dreams, but you don't allow him to crush his skull either.
Right. Let's start like my boys. I mean, we do that all the time at the ranch. You know, we climb up the tree and he goes, jump, and I go, okay, I'll catch you, right? But dude, if you're gonna be 20 feet high, I'm not going to be able to catch you. We're both gonna die. Okay, so let's take it down a notch. Jump off this because it's 4 feet high. I'll catch you, right? We'll do this together. So there's a balance to this stuff. I you know I love how you interject fear in the book too, but in a loving way. I think there's a whole chapter on fear. 100 years ago, I read a book called uh, by Susan Jeffers called "Fear." Feel the fear and do it anyways. I don't know, it's from
The
like
title of my chapter.
what's that?
That's the title of one of my chapters.
Is it?
It
Okay,
is
because
Feel the Fear and well, I said, well, okay, it's slightly different.
a
It's
little bit
actually
different. Yeah, but it's
it's
about fear. It's about fear and
yeah.
just accepting it or embracing it or whatever.
Yeah,
And
act in spite of your fear is
there
basically
you
the
go. There you
message
go.
that I have.
And
Yeah, same idea.
it's the same. It's so important because you're not telling people not to be fearful. And you're not trying to input a bunch of fear into people, which is happening now. Shit, government's completely run by fear, right? Um, but you're like, listen, there's just fear in everything. We've got fear of flight. I mean, it's inbred in us to have fear. That's totally cool. But you have to face the fear and see the reality of the fear, right? I mean, don't touch fire. Be afraid of touching the fire. You're going to burn your ass off, right? So, but don't be afraid of fire because you can cook with it. It can heat your house, whatever. So I loved that chapter on fear. And it's just like the kid jumping off the thing. It's like, I'm glad you don't have fear to jump, but let's just tone it down a bit to where you don't die.
Well, you just made a very important distinction, and I'm glad you brought it up because I haven't made it yet as we've been talking today, which is that I'm not trying to extinguish fear from people's hearts. Fear is a necessary emotion, just like anger. I don't want people to no longer be angry. You need to be angry. The famous quote, one of the philosophers had said hundreds or thousands of years ago, the difficulty with anger is not the anger, it's being angry at the right time, at the right person, at the right place, to the appropriate degree, and for the right reasons. Fear is the same. I want people to be afraid if they step out in the street as a bus is coming down the side of the road. If you don't feel fear, you're gonna die. You need to feel that fear. And in some cases, you need to stop your actions because of the fear. But we've gone to another extreme today where we've encouraged people to be afraid of everything and to not act because of their fear. And in many cases now, we need to feel the fear and actually act in spite of it. And to be able to do that, you have to have a functioning brain that can think critically. And we've lost critical thinking skills. So I don't care if you live in fear, but if you have a critical brain that can actually think, then you can make good decisions even while you're addicted to the fear and while you're feeling it. If you're an addict of alcohol, for example, I would not ever try to order somebody to lose his craving for alcohol. That may not ever happen. That may be a failure, a failed mission. What my goal is for someone who's addicted to alcohol, not to lose the craving for alcohol, but to learn ways and techniques using their brain and their behavior to no longer drink. Well, how do you do that? You find substitutes for the feeling and pleasure that alcohol brings you. You sublimate your desire to escape your pain by drinking alcohol into, let's say, service to your community, being a mentor, being a sponsor. You avoid the dealer. You don't go to places that would encourage you, if you're in a moment of weakness, to go and drink again. You would go to places that encourage healthy practices, like the gym, like walks in the park, where you're going to get reinforcement of feeling really great from natural endorphins. And then, at least in that moment, you're going to say, I don't even want to drink right now. I feel so damn good. And then maybe over time, you're going to feel like you don't want to drink almost never. And so only times that you want to drink are in moments where you've lost a spouse, or you broke your leg, or there's some serious event that's occurred, and that's where you shore yourself up with community and you keep yourself from heading to the bar. So I think the same thing happens with fear. I think you should try to inculcate a life of minimal fear as much as possible, and that comes from taking risks and learning that you can speak out, you can advance your cause, and you still survive. Just like, sparring in jujitsu, you're scared the first time you go on the mat, and then you realize that even if you lose the bout and you get choked out, you're going to come back. So it's okay to put yourself in danger as you learn techniques on how to escape from it. And then you can get into actual real combat and feel confident and not have a lot of fear, because you know what the real fear is, the real weak points where you can go down. And the other things, getting hit in the face by somebody, you're not afraid of that anymore because you know how to close the distance, to create greater distance. This is the way it works with fear. So I'm not telling people stop being afraid. I'm saying recognize valid fear, distinguish it from invalid fear, number one. And then once you've done that, use your brain to start to take calculated risks where appropriate. And of course, where not appropriate, don't take them. And that's a process of learning, psychological and intellectual learning, that you have to undergo, just like a drunk that shows up to aid. It's like, I want to stop drinking. Okay, great. That's a great start. Thank you. That's wonderful. We acknowledge that. Now, how do we allow that to happen, and how do we support it? Well, fear is the same thing. You can't just decide one day, I want to stop being afraid. I want to stop acting on my fear. That's a good start. That's where people need to begin when they read this book. If you don't acknowledge that you're afraid and that you want to not be as afraid, then there's nothing else I can help you with. But if you've passed that step, then the next step is, okay, how do I distinguish between good fear and bad fear, helpful fear, unhelpful fear? And for the unhelpful fear, how do I act in spite of it? there are ways that you can act in spite of your fear. And a lot of it has to do with building community. It has to do with getting support. It has to do with like the game that they used to play. I think it's silly, but it's a good example in not executive training, but employee trust workshops where you would fall backwards into somebody's arms. I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid. Well, do it anyway, because you know you're not going to get hurt. That's already guaranteed. So you just have to do it. And then once they catch you, presumably you feel, well, I have the support of these people. I can fall into their arms anytime and they're going to catch me, like your son dropping out of the tree. He's going to catch, as long as it's 4 feet and not 20.
Yeah.
This is a silly example, but I think it's just a good image that you need to put in your head to find ways to fall into people's arms so that you're not afraid the next time to do it.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.